Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of The Breakfast Club. I'm Got That Funk. Thanks for joining me. I just wanted to jump in on Tuesday because I've been speaking to Sister Danger earlier this evening, and I just want to let everybody know that Sister Danger assures me that she is still a member of The Breakfast Club. I'm glad to hear that. Actually, elated is more likely. But as she warned me when she first took on The Breakfast Club Tuesdays, summertime is her busiest time of the year for the things that she likes to do and the way that she earns her living and so forth. And so hopefully, I think we have an understanding that she's going to be back from time to time, and when she's not, hopefully she'll give me more advance notice that she's not going to be able to do it so I can get another guest host on. By the way, I want to thank so many people for volunteering to do guest host slots on Fridays. I've already got the next 5 Fridays booked with new guest hosts now. And more guest hosts to come as well, old ones and new ones. So be reassured about that. People you've seen on the Breakfast Club before are coming back as regular hosts are coming back as guests, and also former guest hosts. I am absolutely determined to get back on. People like Noel Plum 99, Tommy from the Bronx, and so forth. Guys like that and me, we go way back on YouTube, and hopefully I haven't completely lost my clout there. So anyway, that's that. And by the way, apologies. It's been extremely hot in the UK lately, as you can probably tell by my hands being a different color to my arms. I work outside, have to wear gloves. Anyway, because it's been so hot, all the windows are open, and I live right next to a train station, so don't be surprised if you hear some train noise in a minute. Anyway, I want to briefly talk a little bit about some of the subjects Brock Lawley talked about on his video, Velvet Clubs and Islam. And Brock, there's so many different points I wanted to address in your video. I won't be able to do them all in this particular video. I'm going to re-reference it as I continue with my series about dealing with jihadi terrorism. And first of all, Brock, I want to say I'm not sure if you misunderstood or if you just wanted to deal with the one aspect of it, but the video that you watched by me last week was not my sort of solution to the problem. It's an aspect of the problem as far as I see it. And I was grateful when you did your video that you seemed to acknowledge that there are many different sort of tributaries that are flowing into this river, as it were. And so I'm glad that we seem to understand one another on that level. But in your video, Brock, you said that you don't want the doctor operating if he can't identify the cancer. And hello, kettle. My name is pot. Here's the thing. When we're talking about dealing with jihadi terrorism, yes, obviously that's a serious problem in its own right. But I don't necessarily blame jihadi terrorism on the economic circumstances abroad or Western foreign policy or any of that kind of stuff. I don't blame the terrorism on that per se, but like you say, Brock, it does factor in. Neither do I blame the more ugly aspects of Islamic dogma, which contribute to jihadism. I don't blame those exclusively. I consider them to be a factor of jihadism. But more to the point, Brock, I consider jihadi terrorism to be a symptom of a much bigger problem. And that problem is basically the way the world works in general. I'm glad that you acknowledged in your video that there is such a thing as a military-industrial complex. It's my opinion that the military-industrial complex is like a fire. It can never find satisfaction. Just taking Barack Obama in his last year of his presidency, it was announced toward the end of 2016 that Obama had dropped something like 26,000 bombs from drones abroad in the year of 2016, which is 500 a week. That's outrageous in my opinion. And those bombs aren't free, okay? They cost money. And there's no point in the United States, with our enormously inflated military budget, carrying on buying weapons if we're not going to be using them. Okay, that's one aspect of the military-industrial complex that I think contributes to this problem of jihadi terrorism. But I actually think jihadi terrorism is a symptom of that problem, because it's not only blowback, from our aggressive foreign policy that's responsible, so I'm not blaming our foreign policy for the blowback. I'm saying that this all factors in to the problem, because terrorists don't get their money and their weapons from nowhere, okay? And Brock, in your video, you quite rightly mentioned that there are certain things that we're just not supposed to talk about. And you were more talking about like the booby traps of, accidentally saying things in such a candid manner that people will just go, oh, you're a bigot or you're a racist or whatever, and try and deflect the conversation away from the original point. And I agree that those booby traps exist and they're unfortunate. I'm not really sure what you can actually do about it other than be careful about how you express yourself, because I'm not advocating for the existence of booby traps as such, but I recognize why they exist. They serve a purpose. Because if you've spent any time in comment sections where people talk about these issues on YouTube, you will come across people who do, whether they mean to or not, lump all of Muslims into one category and think that they all must follow this extremist ideology, which just simply isn't true. But there are people out there like that. So whilst I agree with Hayes that it kind of sucks that you have to sort of do a sort of disclaimer before you talk about this issue, you shouldn't have to. I agree with him. You shouldn't have to. You should take it as read. I mean, people watching me, for example, have been watching me off and on for 8 years. And I think Brock, you and Hayes and other people who watch me, who have watched me for a long time, like Sarah Hunt's another one I can think of, you all know pretty much where I'm coming from. So if I say something in a candid way, you're not necessarily going to jump to the conclusion that, oh, this guy's obviously a bigot. But people do come to videos long after the fact. That's just the nature of YouTube, and so I think it's important to make sure that we're clear about certain things. I don't necessarily think you have to fall into the booby traps. Knowing that they're there means you can work your way around them in such a way as to acknowledge what needs to be acknowledged and still be able to be candid without necessarily falling into the trap of sounding like you're Islamophobic or whatever term you want to put on it. But I digress. One thing I really liked about what you said in your video, Brock, is that there's certain things that you're not allowed to talk about. And in that category you put what you call the toxic ideology of that is in the kernel of Islam. There's undoubtedly descriptions of Islamic sections of Islamic scripture that are beyond problematic. Put into practice, those things are unacceptable. It's that simple. Uncivilized is another word for it. And this is why I want to talk about. I was actually going to save this video for a different installment in the series, because my video last week and this one are just part of a larger series I'm doing on this topic on the Breakfast Club, because I think the topic is so complicated and has so many different facets which play into each other, and if we don't talk about all of them, or if we try to isolate them and say this is the problem or that is the problem or whatever, without recognizing that it's all part of the same problem, we're never going to get anywhere. But when it comes to the ideology problem, which is what you and, say, Sarah Hahn, for example, want to talk about when we talk about this issue, yeah, of course, I can agree that absolutely that there is a problem with some of the more vile passages in the Quran and Islamic sources. Similar passages do exist in other religious texts, and that's not some sort of deflection. That is a recognition of the fact that religion exists as a tool to control people. Religion exists, it's a power structure situation. It's always been that. That's the function of religion to people in the hierarchy of religion. Religion has always been used off and on throughout history, and that doesn't really matter what religion you're talking about. At some point, the leaders have mobilized people on grounds of religion to do their bidding. That's just a fact. And at the moment, that fact is pertaining particularly to a certain strain of extremist Islam. And where does that extremist strain come from? Well, there are plenty of countries that are Muslim majority countries where they have different versions of Sharia law. And the most extreme country that fits in that category that I'm aware of is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the KSA. The KSA is known for a fact by at least British intelligence, as far as I've read, possibly other intelligence services, to be paying for and distributing extremist literature to be placed in mosques all throughout Europe. This is already known. We also know that Saudi Arabia is giving money and material support and weapons to ISIS and other jihadi groups. We know this. I find it amusing as hell that Trump goes to Saudi Arabia last month and hugs the orb with the fucking king or whatever. And then the king says to Trump, hey, look, it's Qatar, and we're all pointing the fingers at Qatar. And maybe Qatar has a part to play in it, of course. You know, I don't think there's necessarily one actor. But I think if we point to Qatar without pointing to Saudi Arabia, we've got a problem. Saudi Arabia is one of the worst regimes in the world, in my opinion, as an outside observer. Thank goodness I don't live there, so I don't have a first-hand experience of Saudi Arabia. But someone like me who's an atheist can get his head chopped off in Saudi Arabia. That's not okay. Saudi Arabia is a country that is so backwards thanks to its reliance on this backwards, archaic ideology that stems from a very fundamentalist view of Islam. They have religious police in Saudi Arabia. Women aren't allowed to go out of the house without a male escort. They're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to drive. That's completely unacceptable in 2017 on my planet, right? They have corporal punishment in Saudi Arabia. You could get your fucking hand chopped off if you steal something. Or you could get lashes if you write something the government doesn't like on an internet blog. You can get 1,000 lashes for shit like that. You can have your head cut off for being an apostate, or if you're homosexual. You can be stoned to death if you cheat on your husband or your wife, or if you have extramarital sex. A visitor like me can get put in jail for holding hands with my wife in public. This is backwards. It's not okay, and we need to get out of bed with Saudi Arabia. They're funding the people who are doing us harm. That reason all by itself is a reason we should get out of bed with Saudi Arabia. Their human rights violations is another good reason why we never should have got into bed with them in the fucking first place. And everyone says, oh yeah, but it's sort of politically expedient that we have to be in bed with Saudi Arabia because, you know, they control the pulse of OPEC, which controls the price of crude oil in the world and so forth. And even if it's not just about the oil that we get from Saudi Arabia, it's Saudi Arabia's influence over all of the oil production in the world that we need to be wary of, and so on and so on. And whilst there might be a kernel of truth to that, I actually think it's a little more insidious than that. And let me put my hands in the air right now and say everything that follows, for a moment anyway, is speculation on my part. You can call me a conspiracy theorist. I just think this is harmless speculation. I'm not saying that this is correct. I'm saying it kind of looks this way to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. The Saudi royal family is said to be worth more than $1.5 trillion. And I acknowledge that there's something like a couple of dozen princes in the Saudi royal family, so it's not limited to one person. But $1.5 trillion is rich beyond the dreams of avarice. They haven't even started to spend the money that they made back in the 80s. So that's how fucking rich they are, okay? They're that rich. And we've just made weapons agreements to sell them weapons and other materials, billions and billions and billions of dollars worth. Why do we keep kissing Saudi Arabia's ass? Their human rights record is appalling. We know they're funding ISIS and other jihadi groups in the Middle East. We know they've got their sights set on Iran and want the United States to fight a proxy war on their behalf in Iran. This is not a secret. This is an open secret, if you want to call it that. This is the kind of thing you're not supposed to say. It's the kind of thing you're not going to hear too much about on mainstream media. And it's the conversation that we need to be having. We need to get out of bed with Saudi Arabia, not just because of the oil thing like I mentioned before, but here's my speculation. With $1.5 trillion, that's not a whole bunch of money sitting in some kind of gigantic warehouse vault like Scrooge McDuck where they go swimming in the coins. No. $1.5 trillion is multiple investments in companies all over the world, predominantly in the United States. The Saudi royal family, if they wanted to, if they wanted to, they could dump everything they own that they have invested in America and crash our economy in a single day. I think that's why we kiss Saudi Arabia's ass, because they could fuck us at any moment and we fucking know it. That can't be allowed. That situation can't be allowed. That is a direct infringement on our sovereignty, or maybe I suppose it's more of an indirect infringement on our sovereignty. But the fact is, it's not the fact. My speculation, it seems to me that if they wanted to fuck us over, if they wanted to crash our economy, they could get away with it. So we play nice with Saudi Arabia because they're a big player in the region. They control the price of oil worldwide to a pretty large degree, and they could fuck us if they want to. So we have to untangle all of that if we're going to deal with the fundamentalist, extreme, jihadi terrorism that's going on in the world. Because if we don't get out of bed with Saudi Arabia, we're helping them to make it worse by selling them all these weapons and enabling them to give material support to terrorist groups. We're making it worse. That can't be okay. Back when George Bush was president, one of the first things he did as he declared the war on terror was sign an executive order saying that any country that is responsible for giving money or material support to terrorists is our enemy. It might be a bit far to call Saudi Arabia the enemy at this point, although it is worth noting that 14 of the 19 hijackers in September 11th were Saudis. It's worth noting that Osama bin Laden and his family was another one of the richest families in Saudi Arabia, and Osama bin Laden's expressed reason for orchestrating the 9/11 attacks was to get the United States to remove its military presence from Saudi Arabia, which we installed during and after the first Gulf War in the early 90s against Saddam Hussein. And you know what? After we invaded Iraq, which never had anything to do with September 11th, we did slowly but surely withdraw from Saudi Arabia to a pretty large degree. So we basically gave bin Laden what he wanted. Hello? Did no one notice that? The terrorism seemed to work, didn't it? Because we did what they wanted us to do. But then, by that point, jihadism had taken on a life of its own, and with continued material support from Saudi Arabia and Qatar and others, this problem's only going to get worse. So yeah, Brock, you say you don't want the liberal doctor to operate on the patient because he can't identify the cancer. Quite frankly, Kettle, my name is Pot, okay? I think you've misidentified the cancer. I think the cancer, as far as the ideological cancer is concerned, that isn't where the terrorism is coming from necessarily. It's the fact that it's being promoted in an aggressive way by one of the richest entities on earth. And we've got to deal with that entity if we're going to deal with that problem. What do you guys think? I am by no means advocating a war against Saudi Arabia, but I am saying we need to have candid conversations like this in a much more public forum. The politicians have to get behind this. I noticed that Jeremy Corbyn mentioned some of this stuff when he was running during the recent general election campaign in the UK. Bernie Sanders is also making noises about this on the Senate floor. So hopefully this will get more traction in mainstream media, and people will start to recognize that without dealing with Saudi Arabia, it's only going to get worse. We need to not only stop dealing with them in terms of selling them weapons, we need to get out of bed with them completely until they fucking buck up their ideas a bit and abandon some of this extreme Islam that they follow and promote. Because even if we can stop them from promoting it to other parts of the world, the fact that it exists in Saudi Arabia is not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay in the 21st century for people to get lashes for expressing their opinions. It's not okay for people to get their fucking limbs cut off because they broke a law. That's not okay, folks. It's just not okay. And it's time we stand up and say so in a loud voice and insist that they join the rest of the modern world by recognizing human rights and stop funding terrorism. I want to thank you guys for watching this video. Nathan Brendan Masters will be here tomorrow on The Breakfast Club. I have absolutely no idea what he's going to talk about, but I very much look forward to it because Nathan is kind of like our home run hitter here on The Breakfast Club. I think Nathan's videos combined have more views than probably any 5 Breakfast Clubbers put together. So congrats on that, by the way, Nathan. You rock, man. Anyways, looking forward to Nathan's video tomorrow. Looking forward to Hayes' video on Friday. Of course, JJ Talks is here on Thursday. Sword Sage on Saturday. Serious Mind on Sunday. And I'll see you again next Monday. Until then, may all your ups and downs be ups.